right, so this week Ethan led us through this conversation, treasures in heaven. Don't store up treasures on earth, treasures in heaven. If you've been around church for any amount of time, you've probably heard that pithy phrase. Yeah. There's something about that word treasure. I feel like I've heard you teach on this before, and it resonated with me. It can sound kind of like treasure, like, you know, Pirates, Treasure Island. Like you just don't just picture like jewels. You know? Were those real things? Just boxes full of gold, like Pirates of the Caribbean. But you guys have you've been pastor for how long?
30 years.
30 years, pastoring for
2 decades. Yeah.
Yeah, look at you. Well,
how long you been alive?
Almost as long as you've been pastoring. Longer than you've been pastoring. I got a solid 7. But I want to ask you guys this: when we talk about money, it's easy to think, oh, my rich cousin or this guy who, and it's easy to kind of, when Jesus says these things, it's not about me. You read the stats. We're in America. We're rich, right? But we don't always think about that in specific like dollar amounts, but this idea of treasures. You guys have been pastoring for a collective 50 years, 57 between the 3 of us, bringing up the rear here. How have you seen, what are some of the things that are people's treasures, that if you've interacted with people, counseled people, taught, interacted, what are you like, that's a treasure that you are holding on this earth? What are some of the things that come to mind for you guys?
Yeah, I think society can be easily materialistic possessions, right? Yeah. Hoping that maybe the next phase can bring some sort of satisfaction or joy, or an item could be. So I think there's a whole category materialistically that could constitute treasure, or maybe even, as you were saying, like the focus on money.
Yeah.
You know, right now I kind of enjoy cryptocurrency. Like as we're filming this,
is
Bitcoin halving, and so like I just have to be very careful not to get consumed, but live maybe concerned.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think that question's a very good question, because rich, poor, anywhere in between, you can be fixated on money, right? So that's the first thing I think. Like I remember when we made nothing, we lived in an 800 square foot home, okay? And I was young, we were, working all these jobs, so I would have been poor in most people's eyes. And but I was young, and people would have me go help them move, and I'm helping people move into these $250,000 homes. And I remember I would become frustrated and covet, and like it's easy to think, well, you rich people get in your big houses and whatever. And
$250,000 in whatever year that was.
30 years I've been doing it.
Probably like $1 million home now. Yeah.
But I also think that it goes even broader than that. I read a book one time that was talking about our hearts are these idol factories.
Yeah.
And I think that what I treasure, I'm willing to sacrifice for. And I think so, and those things end up being the urgent overtakes the important. And so it can be all kinds of things. It can be money and material things. It can be prestige and power. It can be career success and notoriety. To be honest with you, I worry about some of the things that we can treasure when it comes to our children. What I treasure is that they're the number one athlete, the most popular kid, the this, that, and the other thing. And I think what he's saying there, so he's talking very specifically about some things, but my heart is this idol factory.
Yeah.
And it's really a heart issue. It has nothing to do with my amount of money I make or the position I have. I can be the CEO or not the CEO, the furthest down from the CEO, and still that idol can be there, right? That can begin directing my heart, and my heart's going to follow whatever I treasure, is what he's saying,
Yeah. What are there super practical things that come to your guys' mind on like how to know when something is, we all want Jesus to be our treasure. It's like, I want to store up my treasures in heaven. I want those things that matter and treasures on earth. What are almost the like dashboard lights, or like, I think that's a treasure, to use language that's been around a minute, is like when that good thing, not that they're bad things, like, but when a good thing becomes an ultimate thing. What are almost the on the ground sensors, so to say, that you're like, I think this is where my treasure's at? Like, how do I self-identify that?
I think maybe a piece, what you talk about a lot, how you lead in conversations somewhat, circles back to what do you want to be known for? I think if people were to describe you, maybe in a few words, what would first come to mind? And so, like, maybe that's just a little bit of an example to think through. What do people think that I value based on kind of my trajectory of my life towards that thing?
I heard, I mean, this is really going to date me, right? But I heard a guy say it this way one time, that if you want to see what you treasure, you need to look at two books. One is your checkbook. Back in the day, they had these checks and a checkbook registry. Just look at your checkbook and follow your money, right? So however you do that now. And then your date book, or how you keep your calendar. And so how I spend my money is probably going to tell me something about what I treasure. How I spend my time is going to tell me that. I like what Adam said, too. To be honest with you, I probably could spend a week with you and say, here's what they treasure. You could spend a week with me and say, that's what they treasure. You just kind of watch, kind of spy on your life a little bit. And I think it's good for us to spy on our life and allow that to tell us, what is it I treasure? Where did my time go? Where did my energy? But here's one. Where did my passion go? So there's things I do. What am I passionate about? Get enthusiastic about. Well, my kid's got to score the touchdown. It's like, and I'm the biggest, I love sports, but I get passionate about that. But when it comes to maybe things that are really, really important, I want my kid to know Jesus, love Jesus, follow Jesus. Like, well, we didn't quite have time for that, or whatever. Sure. So I think if I can just spy on my life a little bit and let that tell me some things.
I think of maybe a little bit of the antithesis. If I spend a lot of time with people and they don't know about my relationship with Jesus, then I might not treasure that.
Ooh, okay.
And so it's like, without having to be brash or over, it should just naturally just flow and outcome in the scope of life.
That is a really good, flipping that, like, I love Jesus. You're like, you do? Yeah. How does that play in your calendar? Well, I don't know. And that's not just going to church. Yeah, I love Jesus. Yeah, how does that show up in my what's checkbook is what it was called? Checkbook. In those very, like, what does that mean to treasure Jesus tangibly? Not in like a shaking a finger, but being introspective, testing myself type of way. Yeah, that's very good. So almost what you were saying, Dan, with that idea of, I could just look at my life, and you could look at my calendar, look at my checkbook, spend a week with somebody and see what it is. Jesus, just before he gets here, what we looked at over the last couple weeks was, and you talked about fasting specifically from food, but you kind of introduced some of those ideas of abstaining and freeing ourselves from things. Because Jesus is saying, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Store up treasures in heaven, not on earth. That can feel kind of abstract, but what are almost the practical, tangible ways that we, as followers of Jesus, as human beings who are drawn to certain things, what does it look like for us to relocate our treasures practically from earth to heaven? Like, what does that look like? What would you guys say?
Well, I mean, I actually think it's a great question, because I think the way my brain would work around it, it makes it a proactive response versus because I naturally, Scripture's pretty clear. I have cravings of my flesh, impulses, appetites that my flesh is going to lead me certain ways, right? And so I think that's where this fasting conversation we did is important. The danger in my life is to constantly say yes to the urgent at the expense of the important. And so what you're saying is, and what I think is part of this, like, how do I say yes to the important and maybe say no to some things that feel urgent? And I think finding ways to do that, whether in my checkbook, like, start with the big rocks. What are the important? And then learn to say, hey, we can't eat out 2 nights a week. We can eat out 1 night a week, or whatever it might be. Look at your calendar, your date book, your phone, whatever it is, and like, look at my time, and how do I say yes to the important first? I think there's a principle of that, the first fruits. Like, how do I say yes to the important first? I think in doing that, I train my affections. Right? I train. So when it comes to my marriage, my wife has the first yes in terms of relationships. And over time, if you were to ask me, who do you want to spend time with? If I had a choice between anybody, my wife. I mean, I love you guys. You're great. But I would rather be with my wife. I've trained right? We enjoy being together. And so I think there's a part of it that's a training their heart's affections to the important, to the eternal, and instead of just allowing the urgent to always do this. Hey, you need it. Well, I don't have time. I don't have money.
Yeah.
I think a helpful paradigm, if we more narrow into money, is we can easily inverse kind of God's desire of give, save, spend. And generosity kind of keeps me from greed. And how can I always just first impulse grow in generosity? How can I plan to be generous, right? And then I think in the save, like, I, in my undergrad, it was financial planning. So, like, in the back of my mind has always been retirement planning, right? And that's healthy and good and intentional. And yet, how can I have that same perspective when it comes to eternity, right? So it's not looking to 60s and I'm going to achieve this life, but it's like, oh, when I pass the doorway of this life into eternity, have I planned for that? And so that's a true investment. And so that isn't just financial investment, but our time, treasure, talents in order of making the greatest impact.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, there's something to what, like you said, like training our hearts, having that perspective of almost freeing. There's like the proactive, like making those decisions, like not just for when I'm 70, 80, 90, but for when I'm gone. Like, what are those? There's author David Brooks, I'm not going to say the phrase right, but he's like, we can live, I wish I had the exact wording, we can live like a resume, or it's like living for, I forget what the word is, for like the things that are said at my funeral. Like, there's resume values, and then like no one is like, Aiden was really good at this, things that I put on my resume to get a job. You know what I mean? What I might treasure now versus he was always there. Whatever, those like eternal kind of things. And then the practice of, how do I free myself from the urgency? What does it look like to, if someone spends a week with me and they're like, you just can't not buy something. You just can't not go here. You can't not. What does it look like to free myself from that? And be like, if I can't live without that thing, I want to intentionally say no to that thing for a period of time, which goes back to the fasting, abstaining conversation, which is something that we're not used to, because we're like, well, why would I deprive myself of that? And you're like, so that I might store up treasures in the right place. And it's powerful stuff.
There's something about what you treasure. I was thinking as you're talking, there's a comfortability. I was thinking about your talk about when we're praying, you're comfortable with silence, the more intimacy there is. And so when it comes to this idea of treasure, there's a comfortability with the familiarity with Jesus, if that's who you treasure, right? Versus, I need you to know I treasure Jesus. I need to make sure, right?
Yeah.
You know that. And I think sometimes what shows me what I treasure is what I fuss and fight about, what I get worked up about, all these things the Sermon on the Mount's talking about. What am I worried about? Well, probably what I treasure. What is it that I'm fussing and fighting about? Well, what I treasure. What is it what I treasure? And I think with Jesus is like, hey, when I can live in the comfortability of the relationship of the presence of Jesus, it's like there's something that just, all those things begin to take a different place. Not that they're not important, not that they don't have a place, but
And that's how Jesus teaches us to pray.
Yeah.
Your will be done in my life on earth as is in heaven. It's a good conversation.
Very good.